Sister wouldn't leave my house after 6 months, claimed squatter rights, so I shut off her power, called Adult Protective Services, and had her committed. Mom says I'm dead to her, but I regret nothing. Hi everyone. Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post. My name is Michael, 30M, and I'm about to tell you how I legally and systematically removed my manipulative sister Sarah, 28F, from my home after my mother Barbara, 54F, guilt-tripped me into what was supposed to be a 2-week stay that turned into 6 months of hell. I need to start with some background because understanding our family dynamic is crucial to understanding how things got so bad. I was always the responsible child. While other kids were playing video games, I was working part-time jobs from age 14. I saved every penny, studied hard, and earned a full scholarship to State University for engineering. By 25, I had a solid job at an aerospace company and had saved enough for a down payment on a house. Nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom ranch in a decent suburb, but it was mine. I'd achieved it without a penny of family help, which was important to me given our family's history of financial chaos. Sarah, on the other hand, lived her life like responsibility was a disease she might catch. She dropped out of high school at 17, got her GED eventually, then spent the next decade bouncing between dead-end jobs, toxic relationships, and our mother's couch. Every few months, there was a new crisis. She needed money for car repairs, the car would be repossessed anyway. She needed first month's rent for an apartment, she'd be evicted within 3 months. She needed bail money, don't ask. Our mother Barbara was Sarah's chief enabler. In Mom's eyes, Sarah was always the victim. Fired from a job? The manager was jealous of her. Evicted? The landlord was unreasonable. Arrested for shoplifting? She was desperate and the store could afford the loss. Mom had spent Sarah's entire life cushioning her from consequences, and the result was a 28-year-old woman with the emotional maturity and life skills of a spoiled teenager. I had successfully kept myself distant from their dysfunction for years. I lived 45 minutes away, enough distance to make casual drop-ins inconvenient. I changed my locks regularly. Yes, Sarah had stolen my spare key before. I never answered calls after 9 p.m., which was when the crisis calls usually came. I had boundaries, and for the most part, they held. Then, 6 months ago, Mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon. This was unusual. Drama calls typically came at night or on weekends. She was crying, which wasn't unusual, but there was something different in her voice. Defeat, maybe. Michael, I need your help, she began. It's Sarah. I almost hung up right then. How many conversations had started exactly this way? But something made me listen. She's been staying with her boyfriend Derek, but he kicked her out. She's been living in her car for 3 days. I found her in the Walmart parking lot this morning. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. So bring her home, I said, already knowing what was coming. I can't. My landlord found out she was staying with me last month and threatened eviction if I had any unauthorized occupants again. I could lose my apartment, Michael. I'm barely making rent as it is. This was new. Mom had finally faced a consequence she couldn't talk her way out of. Her landlord, apparently, was immune to her sob stories. She needs a place to stay for just a couple of weeks, Mom continued. Just until she gets her tax refund and can get an apartment. 2 weeks, Michael. That's all. I said no. Firmly, clearly, no. I reminded Mom of the time Sarah stayed with me for 1 night, and I came home from a business trip to find she'd thrown a party that resulted in $2,000 of damage. I reminded her of the money Sarah had stolen from me over the years, probably close to $5,000 all told. I reminded her that Sarah was an adult who needed to face adult consequences. Mom hung up on me. For the next 3 days, my phone was a battlefield. Mom called constantly. She enlisted relatives I hadn't spoken to in years to plead Sarah's case. My Aunt Jennifer called me heartless. My Uncle Robert said I was abandoning family. My cousin Amanda, who'd had her own Sarah experiences, privately messaged me to stay strong but publicly sided with Mom to keep the peace. On day 4, Mom escalated. She showed up at my workplace. I worked at a defense contractor with serious security. Mom somehow talked her way past the front desk and was waiting in the lobby when I came down for lunch. Sarah was with her, and I'll admit, she looked rough. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, clothes that had seen better days. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sympathy. Then Sarah opened her mouth. Nice to see you're doing well while I'm homeless, she said, looking at my work attire with undisguised resentment. The sympathy evaporated. Mom launched into her performance. Tears, loud voice, mentions of family loyalty and how she'd raised me better than this. Security was starting to take notice. My co-workers were staring. My manager, who'd come down to grab me for a meeting, was watching with raised eyebrows. I had two choices: stand firm and likely have security escort my mother and sister out, creating a scene that would follow me professionally for years, or cave with conditions. I chose option 2, but I wasn't going down without protection. 2 weeks, I said quietly. She can stay 2 weeks. But there will be rules and a written agreement. Mom's tears miraculously dried up. Sarah smirked, thinking she'd won. They had no idea what they'd just agreed to. That evening, I drew up a document. Not just any document, a legally binding rental agreement. I'd learned from past mistakes and from reading countless stories online about squatters' rights and tenant law. The agreement specified: Sarah would rent the guest room for 2 weeks at $1 per day. A payment was due in advance. I wanted a paper trail showing this was a rental, not a family visit. No guests without prior written permission. No smoking, drinking, or drug use on the property. Quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. No use of common areas between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Any damage would be documented and charged. A failure to vacate by the agreed date would result in immediate eviction proceedings. I also included a clause that this was a fixed-term lease with no option for renewal or extension. I made 3 copies and drove to Mom's apartment that night. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said when she read it. "Then find somewhere else to stay," I replied. She signed it. Mom witnessed it. I gave them each a copy and kept the original. I also took photos of them signing it and recorded, legally in my state, Mom acknowledging that this was a 2-week arrangement only. Sarah moved in that night with 2 garbage bags of possessions and an attitude that could curdle milk. I showed her the guest room, which I'd already prepared. I'd removed anything valuable or breakable. I'd installed a lock on the closet where I'd stored the good linens and electronics that had been in there. The furniture was basic but functional: a bed, dresser, and nightstand, all from a thrift store specifically for this situation. If she destroyed them, I wouldn't care. I also installed a camera in the hallway outside her room, legal since it was a common area and disclosed in the rental agreement, and a smart lock on my bedroom door that only opened with my phone. The first 3 days were quiet. Sarah mostly stayed in the room, presumably looking for jobs on her phone, though more likely scrolling social media. She'd emerge for food, use the bathroom, and retreat. I started to think maybe, just maybe, this would work out. Day 4, the problems started. I came home to find a strange man in my living room. Derek, the ex-boyfriend who'd kicked her out. They were working things out, Sarah explained. I pointed to the agreement: no guests without permission. Derek left, but not before trying to size me up, probably wondering if I was worth robbing. Day 5, I woke up at 2 a.m. to music blasting from the guest room. I knocked, told her to turn it off. She turned it down but not off. I texted her a formal warning about violating quiet hours. Day 7, 1 week in, I came home to the smell of cigarette smoke. Sarah swore she hadn't been smoking, but the camera footage showed her opening the window and leaning out to smoke. Another written warning. Day 10, I found her passed out drunk in the bathroom at 3 a.m. She'd vomited on the floor and hadn't cleaned it up. Strike 3. Day 14 came. The 2 weeks were up. I knocked on her door at 8 a.m. with a typed notice that her lease had expired and she needed to vacate immediately. Sarah laughed. Actually laughed in my face. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know my rights. I'm a tenant now. You have to evict me properly, and that takes months." She wasn't entirely wrong. Despite the fixed-term lease, she had established residency. In my state, even with cause, eviction could take 30 to 90 days. But Sarah had made a crucial mistake. She thought I was still the brother who'd always eventually folded to family pressure. She didn't know that I'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. "Okay," I said calmly. "Have it your way." I went to my room and initiated Plan B, the systematic dismantling. First, I filed for formal eviction that same day. The court date was set for 3 weeks out, but I knew that even if I won, it could be weeks more before she was actually removed. So while the legal process churned, I got creative. The rental agreement, which Sarah clearly hadn't read carefully, specified that the $14 rental fee covered basic accommodation only. Utilities, internet, and amenities were provided at the landlord's discretion as a courtesy. Time to exercise that discretion. I started with the internet. The router had advanced parental controls that let me set access schedules and speed limits for specific devices. Sarah's phone and laptop were suddenly limited to 1 megabit per second, barely enough to load email, and only between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. "I'm trying to reduce costs," I explained when she complained. "Feel free to get your own internet plan." Next came the power. I installed a smart electrical panel, expensive, but worth it, that let me control individual circuits. The guest room suddenly only had power during business hours. Sarah bought a power bank for her phone. I pointed out that charging it during the powered hours and using it at night was theft of electricity not covered in her rental agreement. She called me insane. I documented her admission of theft. The temperature came next. Smart thermostats are wonderful things. The guest room was kept at exactly 62 degrees in winter, the legal minimum in my state, and 85 in summer. The rest of the house remained comfortable. "Energy efficiency," I explained. "Your rent doesn't cover climate control." Then I removed the guest room door. The agreement guaranteed a private space, not a door. Sarah hung a sheet. I pointed out that hanging items from the doorframe was a modification to the property not permitted in the agreement. She took it down. She put it back up when I left. I documented it. Meanwhile, I was building my case. Every violation was photographed, recorded, and filed. I hired a private investigator, yes really, to document that Derek was essentially living there too, coming and going at all hours. I kept a detailed log of every disturbance, every piece of damage, every threatening text message. Sarah tried to fight back. She called the police, claiming I was harassing her. The officers looked at my documentation, the legal rental agreement, and the formal eviction filing, and told her it was a civil matter. She posted on social media about her abusive brother. I responded with photos of the damage she'd done and screenshots of her threatening messages. Her friends got quiet real fast. Mom, meanwhile, was in full meltdown mode. She called me crying, screaming, begging. I sent her the same response every time. "You said 2 weeks. It's been X days. She needs to leave." Mom tried to get other family involved, but by now, word had spread about what was really happening. Turns out, Sarah had burned a lot of bridges over the years, and many relatives were quietly cheering me on. Week 4 of Sarah's occupation, I escalated further. I noticed she'd been posting increasingly erratic things on social media. Videos of herself crying, talking about feeling unsafe, making vague threats about what she might do if pushed too far. I screenshotted everything and made a call to Adult Protective Services. "I'm concerned about my sister's mental health," I explained. "She's showing signs of severe distress, making threats of self-harm, and I don't feel qualified to help her." They said they'd look into it. Week 5, the court date arrived. Sarah showed up looking like she'd dressed for a job interview, trying to appear responsible. I showed up with a binder 2 inches thick. Photos of damage. Documentation of every violation. The private investigator's report showing Derek basically living there. Financial records showing she hadn't paid rent beyond the initial $14. Character witness statements from neighbors about the disturbances. Sarah tried to claim I was making the space uninhabitable. I showed that every condition met legal minimums. She claimed I was harassing her. I showed that I was simply enforcing the terms she'd agreed to. She claimed the agreement was signed under duress. I played the recording of her laughing while signing it, saying, "This is ridiculous," but signing anyway. The judge ruled in my favor. Sarah had 30 days to vacate. But I wasn't done. Update 1, 2 days after court. Sarah thought she had 30 more days to make my life hell. She was wrong. The day after court, Adult Protective Services showed up. They'd reviewed her social media, particularly the self-harm threats. They'd also discovered something I hadn't known. Sarah had a history of mental health holds in other states. She'd been involuntarily committed twice in California, where she'd lived briefly with some guy she met online, and once in Nevada, another failed relationship. They offered her a choice, voluntary evaluation or they'd petition for an involuntary hold. Sarah, probably thinking she could manipulate her way out, chose voluntary. The moment she left with them, I had a locksmith on speed dial. Since she was voluntarily leaving for medical evaluation, she had effectively abandoned the property. I changed every lock in the house. I also had a cleaning crew standing by. What they found in the guest room was horrifying. Empty bottles hidden everywhere, under the bed, in the closet I thought was locked, she'd broken it, behind the dresser. Drug paraphernalia. Holes punched in the walls that she'd covered with posters. The mattress was so stained and damaged it had to be thrown out. The smell alone made one cleaner gag. We documented everything. Every piece of damage, every hidden bottle, every sign of the destruction she'd wrought in just 5 weeks. The total came to almost $4,000 in damages. Mom arrived while the cleaners were still there. She saw the room. She saw what her sensitive daughter had done. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother truly speechless. This isn't possible, she finally managed. I showed her the photos. The bottles. The drug paraphernalia. The feces, yes, feces, smeared on the back of the closet door. Mom threw up. Right there on my lawn. When she recovered, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked old and defeated. I did this, she said quietly. I created this. It was the first time I'd ever heard her take responsibility for anything regarding Sarah. Update 2, 1 week later. Sarah was released after 5 days, but with conditions. She'd been diagnosed with several personality disorders and substance abuse issues. She was required to attend intensive outpatient therapy and was placed on a waiting list for transitional housing. Here's where it gets interesting. During her evaluation, Sarah had apparently admitted to a lot. The years of manipulation. The deliberate destruction of property when she didn't get her way. The fact that she'd never intended to leave my house and had been planning to establish squatters' rights. She'd also admitted to something that explained a lot. She'd been using meth. The erratic behavior, the staying up all night, the paranoia, the damage to the room, it all made sense now. Sarah couldn't go back to Mom's because of the landlord issue. She couldn't come back to my house because I'd gotten a restraining order while she was in evaluation. The drug paraphernalia and threats were enough for a judge to grant it. She ended up in a women's shelter. Mom tried to visit her there, but Sarah refused to see her. Blamed her for not fighting harder to make me let her stay. Mom came to my house after that rejection, and we had the first honest conversation of our lives. I destroyed her, Mom said, sitting at my kitchen table. Every time I saved her from consequences, I made her weaker. Every time I blamed someone else for her problems, I taught her to never take responsibility. She also admitted something that shocked me. She'd been in therapy herself for the past year. Her therapist had been warning her about enabling Sarah, but she hadn't been able to stop. It was like an addiction, she said. I needed to be needed. Update 3, 1 month later. Sarah was placed in transitional housing, a structured environment with rules, curfews, and mandatory therapy. She had to get a job within 2 weeks or be kicked out. She actually managed it, getting hired at a fast food place. The restraining order was still in place, but I heard updates through family. Sarah was apparently telling everyone that I'd saved her life by forcing her to get help. Not gratefully, more like stating a fact she resented but couldn't deny. The guest room had been completely renovated. I'd had to tear it down to the studs to get rid of the smell and damage. It cost me $6,000 total. I sued Sarah in small claims court and won a judgment for the full amount plus court costs. I'll never see that money, but having the judgment on record felt like closure. I turned the room into a home gym. Every morning when I work out in there, I think about how different things could have been if someone had just told Sarah no 20 years ago. Update 4, 2 months later. This is probably my final update. Sarah has been in transitional housing for 2 months now. According to cousin Jennifer, who works at the facility, Small World, Sarah is actually doing okay. She's kept her job, attended all her therapy sessions, and hasn't had any major incidents. The meth addiction explanation made a lot of past behavior make sense. The paranoia, the aggression, the destruction. She'd apparently been using for about 2 years, which lined up with when her behavior went from difficult to destructive. Mom and I have started talking again. Not a lot, but some. She's continuing therapy and has joined a support group for parents of addicts. She sent me a letter apologizing, not just for the recent events, but for years of putting Sarah's needs above mine, for parentifying me, for making me the responsible one while letting Sarah be the perpetual child. I'm not ready to forgive her yet, but I kept the letter. The house is peaceful now. The security system I installed, 8 cameras, smart locks, motion sensors, might be overkill, but it makes me feel safe. The home gym that used to be the guest room is my favorite room in the house now. I installed a metal door with a digital lock that only opens with my phone. Yes, it's excessive, but it's also a reminder that boundaries, once set, must be defended. Final reflection. Looking back on these 6 months, I don't regret what I did. It was ugly, stressful, and it destroyed what was left of our family dynamic. But that dynamic was toxic and needed to be destroyed. The saddest part is that if Sarah had just been honest from the beginning, if she'd admitted she had a problem, if she'd asked for real help instead of trying to manipulate her way into free housing, I would have helped her. I would have paid for rehab. I would have supported her recovery. But she didn't want help. She wanted to continue the pattern she'd lived her whole life. Take advantage, avoid responsibility, blame others when things went wrong. It took literal involuntary commitment to break that pattern. For anyone dealing with similar situations, here's what I learned. Document everything from day one. Every text, every incident, every piece of damage. You'll need it. Never let family pressure override your instincts. If someone has burned you before, they'll do it again unless something fundamental has changed. Use the legal system. It exists for a reason. Don't try to handle everything yourself. Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone is exactly what they need. Sarah needed to face consequences. Mom needed to see what she'd created. I needed to stand up for myself. You can't help someone who doesn't want help. You can only protect yourself from their destruction. The metal door on what used to be the guest room stays. Not because I'm afraid Sarah will come back, the restraining order takes care of that. But because it's a monument to boundaries. It's a daily reminder that I have the right to peace in my own home. Sarah recently celebrated 60 days clean and employed. Mom sent me a photo from the transitional housing graduation ceremony. Sarah looked different, older, maybe, or just worn down. But also present in a way she hadn't been in years. Maybe someday we'll be able to have some kind of relationship. Maybe not. I'm not waiting to find out. I'm living my life, in my house, with my metal door and my peace and my boundaries intact. The guest room war is over. I won not by fighting on their terms but by refusing to play their game. I won by using the system, documenting everything, and being willing to be seen as the villain in their story. Because here's the truth. Sometimes being the villain in someone else's story is the only way to be the hero in your own. The house is quiet now. No drama, no chaos, no middle-of-the-night crises. Just peace. It cost me my relationship with my family, at least temporarily. But I gained something more valuable. Self-respect and the knowledge that I can stand up for myself, no matter who's trying to tear me down. Was it worth it? Every single second.